If you were born between 1965 and 1980, congratulations, you are Generation X, and in 2026, you are between 46 and 61 years old. But here is the controversial part: many people still call Gen X boomers, even though they grew up in a completely different world. They were the kids with cassette tapes, VHS movies, landline phones, paper maps, and childhoods without smartphones tracking every move. Now, those same kids are parents, managers, caregivers, homeowners, renters, and workers trying to survive a world rebuilt by the internet, social media, and AI. Boomers got blamed, millennials got analyzed, Gen Z got studied, but Gen X was often expected to stay quiet and figure everything out alone. So the real question is not only how old Gen X is today. The real question is, why does this generation feel invisible exactly when it is carrying so much? Let's answer the question quickly. In 2026, Generation X is generally between 46 and 61 years old. Most researchers define Gen X as people born from 1965 through 1980. That means someone born in 1965 turns 61, while someone born in 1980 turns 46. If you were born around 1970, you are about 56, if you were born around 1975, you are about 51. So Gen X today is not elderly, but it is no longer young adulthood either. They are in midlife and late career, often balancing work, aging parents, adult children, health decisions, and retirement planning. That is why the age range matters. It explains why Gen X feels like the bridge between the analog past and the digital future. These are the people who remember life before smartphones, but now must adapt to social media, remote work, streaming, and AI. That makes their age uniquely powerful today. Generation X sits between two much louder neighbors, baby boomers before them and millennials after them. Baby boomers are usually the parents, bosses, and cultural giants Gen X grew up watching. Millennials are the younger adults Gen X often hired, managed, raised, or tried to understand. This position matters because Gen X became the bridge generation. They were young enough to adapt to computers, email, the internet, smartphones, streaming, and AI. But they were also old enough to remember a childhood before all of that existed. They learned responsibility in an analog world, then had to reinvent themselves in a digital one. That is why Gen X often feels stuck in the middle. They are too young to be boomers, too old to be millennials, and too independent to complain loudly. In 2026, that middle position explains much of their identity: practical, skeptical, adaptable, and quietly resilient every single day. At 46 to 61, Gen X is standing in one of the most complicated stages of adult life. They are not starting out anymore, but they are not finished building their lives either. Many are reaching the peak of their careers, while wondering how long they can keep going. At the same time, they may be helping aging parents, supporting adult children, or raising teenagers. This is the sandwich generation moment, where responsibility comes from both above and below. Their bodies are changing, their energy is changing, and their relationship with time is changing. Retirement is no longer a distant idea, it is becoming a real deadline with real numbers. But unlike many boomers, Gen X often cannot count on pensions or lifelong job security. Technology keeps changing their workplaces, forcing them to learn new tools while colleagues assume adaptation is easy. So this age range is special because it forces Gen X to ask difficult questions about money, health, purpose, family, and identity. In 2026, being Gen X means looking backward with nostalgia, forward with concern, and inward with strength. They are not just getting older, they are redefining what midlife survival, reinvention, and quiet power can look like. Gen X is often called the forgotten generation because they rarely became the center of the cultural conversation. Baby boomers were discussed as the powerful post-war generation that shaped politics, money, and institutions. Millennials became the symbol of student debt, social media, workplace change, and delayed adulthood. Gen Z is constantly studied for mental health, technology, identity, and the future of culture. But Gen X grew up in between, expected to be independent, quiet, tough, and low maintenance. Many were latchkey kids who came home to empty houses, made snacks, and learned early not to wait for rescue. Later, they entered adulthood through recessions, corporate downsizing, divorce waves, and rapid technological change. Instead of being celebrated, They were often labeled cynical, slacker, sarcastic, or difficult to market. Yet their invisibility may be their greatest clue. Gen X was not forgotten because they did not matter. They were forgotten because they were too busy surviving, working, parenting, and carrying everyone else. Gen X grew up in a world that now feels almost impossible to explain to younger generations. Their childhood was filled with cassette tapes, vinyl records, VHS movies, arcade games, paper maps, and landline phones. If they wanted to meet friends, they made a plan and trusted people to actually show up. If they wanted music, they waited by the radio with a blank tape ready to record. If they wanted answers, they opened an encyclopedia, asked an adult, or simply figured things out. Many played outside until the streetlights came on, with no GPS, no group chat, and no digital trail. They watched cable television rise, MTV change music, personal computers enter homes, and the internet slowly become normal. This made Gen X the last generation with a truly analog childhood and one of the first with a digital adulthood. They did not just witness the world changing, they had to change with it. Not every General Xer grew up with the same version of Generation X. Older Gen X, born roughly from 1965 to 1972, is about 54 to 61 years old in 2026. They remember the 1970s more clearly: early MTV, Cold War tension, vinyl records, and a more traditional workplace. Younger Gen X, born roughly from 1973 to 1980, is about 46 to 53 years old in 2026. They came of age closer to the 1990s, grunge, CDs, video games, early internet, and mobile phones. Older Gen X may feel closer to boomers in responsibility and retirement pressure. Younger Gen X may feel closer to millennials in technology, culture, and reinvention. But both groups share the same core experience. They grew up analog, became adults during digital disruption, and learned to adapt without much attention. That is why Gen X is one generation, but not one single story. Gen X is different from boomers and millennials because they grew up between two worlds, not fully protected by the old one and not fully native to the new one. Boomers often came of age in an era that still promised stable careers, pensions, homeownership, and institutional trust. Millennials entered adulthood with the internet already shaping education, dating, shopping, work, and identity. But Gen X had to cross the bridge while it was being built. They learned from boomer parents, but many also learned to take care of themselves early. They raised or managed millennials, while quietly adapting to the same digital systems millennials were expected to understand. Boomers were often seen as powerful, millennials as disrupted, but Gen X was seen as independent enough to need less attention. That independence became both their strength and their invisibility. Unlike boomers, Gen X rarely trusted that one company, one house, or one retirement plan would solve everything. Unlike millennials, they remember a life before constant online connection, personal branding, and public emotional sharing. Gen X became practical, skeptical, private, adaptable, and deeply allergic to being controlled. They are the generation that can fix a printer, question authority, survive a layoff, make a mixtape, and still learn AI when necessary. That is why Gen X is not simply between boomers and millennials. They are the bridge, the translator, and sometimes the quiet shock absorber between two very different generations. In 2026, Gen X is entering a turning point that feels both personal and historical. They are old enough to measure life in decades, not just plans. Many are asking whether they can retire, change careers, stay healthy, or start over. Their parents are aging, their children are becoming adults, and their savings are being tested. The world they once adapted to is changing again through AI, inflation, remote work, and cultural division. For Gen X, 2026 is not only about looking back at cassette tapes, MTV, and childhood freedom. It is about deciding what the second half of life should look like. This generation has already survived recessions, layoffs, divorces, technological revolutions, and being overlooked. Now they are being asked to reinvent themselves one more time. But that may be exactly where Gen X is strongest. They know how to adjust, endure, question, and keep moving forward. So how old is Gen X in 2026? Between 46 and 61. But that answer is only the surface. Gen X is old enough to remember when the world felt slower, quieter, and more personal. They remember waiting, wandering, calling from payphones, making mixtapes, and learning life without a digital safety net. Yet they are also young enough to keep adapting, even when the rules keep changing. They have watched childhood, work, family, technology, and culture transform in one lifetime. They carried responsibility early, complained less than they could have, and survived more than many people noticed. Maybe Gen X was never forgotten. Maybe they were hidden in plain sight, doing the work, raising the kids, helping the parents, and holding the middle together. So if you are Gen X, your age is not just a number. It is proof that you learned to survive change and keep moving forward.